So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Sri Narasimhan. Now, I checked that was the correct pronunciation of his name, and I think I got it nailed, according to Sri, which is great. I'm really happy to say. But Sri is the VP of Enterprise Customer Experience and Insights at CVS Health. Sri, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, thanks, Adrian. Yes, and a 10 out of 10 on the name. You nailed it on that one. So LTR 10 on name.
Excellent. So, Sri, if I could ask you, maybe just give me a bit of a thumbnail sketch on you and the work you do across at CVS Health, and also explain a little bit more about CVS Health for people that may not be stateside and may go on CVS Health. Do I know that name?
Yeah, so CVS. Well, I'll start with CVS. CVS Health is one of the largest healthcare companies in the United States. So, as part of our portfolio of companies, you have retail pharmacies, which a lot of people experience as our CVS pharmacies. If you've ever been here. Many locations throughout the country. We also have a health insurance arm, which is Aetna Health Insurance, which is one of the largest health insurers in the country. And then we have Caremark, which is our PBM, which is a pharmacy benefit manager, manages prescription benefits for consumers. And then finally, we have healthcare delivery, which is a primary care business where Oak Street Health and Signify Health, where we actually treat patients and serve patients with healthcare. In terms of me, the function, I think what's most relevant here is, I lead the consumer experience and insights function, where we are focused on understanding the consumers better than anybody at the company if we can. So consumer sauce, as I mentioned, would be people that go into our stores, members of the insurance business and Caremark business, and then patients, and then also clients. So we have a large B2B kind of segment in those insurance businesses. So understanding what those people experience using a variety of signals. We've run a large survey program, about 18 million surveys. We look at Google reviews, we look at social media data, but now increasingly using AI, we mine things like call transcripts, digital sessions. We have an always on NPS for every single member in our insurance businesses, but using 200 operational variables. And now this kind of new concept, which I think we're going to discuss today, around agentic simulation of consumer behavior. So leveraging all that and working with the business to drive action and change to improve the experiences as much as we can.
Awesome.
And deliver the best in class experience. We want to be the most trusted health company in healthcare. That's our goal.
Nice. Now, you alluded to it about something that you've been up to recently. I mean, and I know it's I got wind of it because you recently authored a white paper with a gentleman by the name of June Park, who is a Simile CEO, and it outlines your kind of approach, key findings, and some broader implications of using generative agent simulations in healthcare. Now, is that sort of like a digital twin type of thing? And if so, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're doing and kind of how it works? Because it all sounds very fancy.
It is a digital twin. The thing is, I think you can't say you have to use the word agentic today. It's like required. If you want someone to listen to you, you have to throw agentic in front of everything. If you go to Starbucks, I think you can buy an agentic cold brew now.
Oh,
yeah, I don't know if you know that. It's a cold brew. I'm just but I think the concept is similar to a digital twin. So the idea is now, with the way AI is developed, you can actually mirror human thinking, decision making, and how people balance risk. And so if you can do that and say, I can create a twin, an agentic twin of you, Adrian, I can then generalize your thought process, your thinking to new scenarios. So I can take you and put you in another scenario and say, okay, given these parameters and this situation, how will Adrian respond? Both in terms of your preference, but also in terms of your choice. Like, what choice will you make? Now, imagine if I do that for hundreds of thousands of people. Now, all of a sudden, and this is the concept of what we're doing with the agentic twins with Simile, we will have, an army of customers with us throughout our entire process and always on and ready to help us build better experiences, test, learn, and run a dress rehearsal on anything we're launching. And that's really the concept here is, can we used AI to actually amplify the consumer voice is the way I think about it, because we can bring them now the thought process of the consumer into any new situation.
And I can get a bit kind of nerdy on the technology, kind of just like anybody else, but I'm also quite pragmatic in my kind of like outlook. And sometimes think, well, this is all very nice technology, but is it just technology for technology's sake, or is it that you're actually aiming to solve an actual kind of problem that you were facing organizationally? I mean, so what problem is it that you're trying to solve with this new approach? I mean, where's the gap? I feel like with it, because you talked about all the data, all the data sources that you can have. Where was the gap that you're trying to solve with this new approach?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to say that I solved consumer centricity by building an army of robots, but you know, that's kind of where we went. Because consumer centricity is hard. We talk a lot
Mm.
about it. You go look at some 10Ks, you'll see it in every 10K. Someone's like, I want to be the most consumer centric company. But consumers are difficult to talk to. You know, surveys are difficult, as you know. And I listen to your podcast, and you hear a lot of people come on here talking about how difficult it is to get feedback via survey. Those response rates are declining. Getting populations of customers to come talk to you is difficult. Even the data mining, generally speaking, most of the data you're looking at is ex post. So something happened to someone, and you're observing what happened, and then you're banking on history repeating itself, but you're not taking that consumer and putting them in that situation and seeing how they'll respond. So for us, this was kind of like that, the old gimmick we used to do. We used to put a chair in every meeting, and we'd be like, you have to think about the consumer. That chair is the consumer. I know, everyone in CX
Yeah,
is
yeah.
probably a version of that. Now I actually have hundreds of thousands of customers in the room. So if you think about it, that's the problem we're solving. It's we are bringing the customer voice into every conversation from start to finish, soup to nuts. We're bringing them from product development through that development process now in terms of even testing and knowing what's going to happen before we go live. So the consumers experience something that we know from the AI simulations of them that they got value out of and that they found the experience beneficial. So
Hmm.
to us, it's solving that core, centricity problem. And I think simulation it's right, right now it's still new. I think we've
Hmm.
been at it for a little over a year, maybe just under a year. And it's only going to get better. But it's basically allowing us to see what'll happen and see how consumers are going to experience these things before it actually happens. It's a little bit sci-fi, man. Honestly, it's like what you're in Westworld or something, but or the Matrix. But it's really got that ability, and we're using it actively to make decisions and build experiences. And so far the early returns have been wonderful.
And so before we get onto the kind of like the impact of stuff, I mean, because I also know that, 'cause I speak to lots of different people, and they talk about simulations and digital twins and all these different sort of things, and particularly around I've talked about this on the podcast before. I remember being at the Qualtrics event kind of earlier in the year, and they, because they've got a big market research arm of their sort of like business, they've started talking about kind of building these kind of like simulations and stuff as well. And one of the biggest questions that came out of that, because there's when you talk to that market, there's a lot of market researchers that are in that market, and they're a little bit like, oh, or people go, does that mean you're not going to talk to customers, real people anymore with kind of like pulses and things? It's like, so explain how this kind of like how it fits into that whole sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I will say, like, one of the funniest things about AI I've observed is everyone has an existential threat from it. Like, it's like, it's like immediately
Like,
like, oh my, what's going to happen to me? But I think like one of the things that we always think about at the company is we don't think about it as replacement. We think about it as amplification. Like, how
mm-hmm,
is it going to make us, more productive and reach groups that we weren't able to reach before?
mm-hmm,
And I think that's the way we think about it here. Just in kind of broad philosophical terms, it's additive. It's going to grow. It's going to increase our impact. I think that we're never going to stop talking to customers. I mean, that's the business we're in, even as not just me and CX, but the
mm-hmm.
company, right? We have
Right.
to learn about real people. The way I think that this is kind of shaping up, is one, we use the customer data to help improve the twins. Like we know a lot of what you hit on it, a lot of this is a change management exercise.
Mm-hmm,
Like when you're asking people to trust an agentic simulation, you need to show the proof that hey, you can mirror what people are actually thinking and doing. So one is it's a really important and rich source of training data.
mm-hmm,
I think that continues to happen even with surveys. Like, I know surveys get a bad rap, but surveys are really important in terms of understanding motive and like what customers, why they're doing things. So we can continue to use that as training data. But beyond that, the conversations we have with customers are more meaningful now. Because with the twins, I don't need to, I can ask them the questions that are more straightforward, more, decision based and things like that, and really focus on the real customers on smarter things that we can talk about, more around motive, more around understanding what makes them tick, and all those things that are probably more interesting as we try to, influence behavior. So for us, it's made us more effective at talking to customers. But of course, we're never going to stop talking to customers. It's a really core part of what we do and will continue to be a core part of what we do. It
Hmm.
probably just changes the types of conversations and maybe the frequency of conversations.
Hmm.
I don't think it's ever going to go away. We're always going to talk to real people.
So we don't want to get into the process of how we build real people because that's probably give us a kind of like an 18 kind of like rating. But let's get into the kind of the process of thinking about how do you build the agentic kind of twins. You talked about all this kind of like kind of data and the use of AI and stuff. I mean, how did that come about? I mean, is that the where Simile kind of comes in? Do they have this kind of like process that helps build that? How did that all work?
Yeah, and June Park and his team are great partners and wonderful thinkers in the space. And June kind of wrote this original paper on all of this way back when. They have the twin engine, but just in broad terms, how it works. We take behavioral data, that we can glean from, this is usually via panels. So we go and get panels of customers like you would in traditional
Hmm.
research. People consent to all this, just to be clear. It's all
Hmm.
consented data. But we'd pull like their behavioral data, so experiential data, observational data, things that they would do on the internet or in more public spaces, social media. We then conduct an AI interview with them. In that AI interview, it's actually, I've taken it. It's a really interesting interview. It's not just like, hey, how do you feel about X? How do you feel about Y? You're presented with actual choices. Like you are presented with like, you have choice A and choice B. What would you choose and why? And it gets at kind of how you think
Okay.
and how you trade off on a decision. And then it goes into more of like external signals, like media diet, people consent to share spend data. So you build this rich twin off of all these different sources. So it's a combination of like of survey data, observational data, external signals, and then these interviews to build a profile of a person. And the way I think about it is it builds like their decision profile. Like
Hmm.
how do they make a decision? How do they actually think and then you can take that profile and generalize it to new scenarios. So it's not just like what the question I always get is how is this different than machine learning? It's not just what they did in the past. Like if it was just what they did in the past, we have tons of models and things like that that do that. It's more about how they think and make trade-offs, which is where this is really unique and it allows you to generalize to new
Okay.
scenarios
Okay.
and new kind of situations.
And did you have to inform the models or almost like frame kind of what was going into the models through using your own sort of personas and sort of like descriptions of different kind of customer in inverted commas types? And when you kind of then ingested all that kind of panel data and maybe supplementary kind of data, did the actual kind of modeling throw up other personas or modified personas that you hadn't thought about? Because do you know what I mean? Because the power of some of these kind of models is just like astonishing in many ways to come up with sort of like going, oh, you've got all these people, but you might not have thought about these folks over here. Here's a subset. Did that happen?
Well, so what's unique about the approach we're taking here is we're actually simulating individuals. So
Oh,
we are creating an individual, like an actual person, like Adrian, Shri, and what you do is when you take these individuals, you then scale it up. You do so many of them that you have scale.
okay.
So that's what I think is because there's a lot of all like similar twin capabilities that
Mm.
are like, hey, we're simulating like a 75-year-old or whatever it might be. Here you're actually simulating individuals. So it's really mirroring what you would do with a traditional market research study. Because now I have these huge populations. So we've created right around 100,000, up at this point over 100,000 twins.
Hmm.
So we are able to actually take that large population, and to your point, we can again filter it and get to more granular groups. But you would basically think of it as having 100,000 customers across all of our different groups twinned. Now, to your point, though, there is important context. Like, what we would do is we would create a bank of customers for, say, pharmacy experiences
Right.
where we ask questions in that interview process that I described that were related more to the pharmacy. Same thing with insurance and stuff like that. Because you could just create a general population one and maybe it would work. But I think it's important to probably, in our estimation, we want to get the kind of context that is important to that experience because we're going to ask, and we do ask some very specific questions, right? So we want to make
Right.
sure that we give them we get the right context from that individual. So that's kind of the difference in approach. So to your point, you do end up with these niche populations, but it's sort of because we've just cast a broad net of our consumer base.
Okay.
Now, if you do want, like, what's really awesome about the tool and the capability, we have we have like specialty patients, we have like, groups that are really hard to get to.
Hmm.
So now we can actually twin those groups where a traditional research panel is super costly and you can only get them one time. And then, that's it. It's hard to find them again. Here, and we've now twinned them. So we have them for good. So that's one of the biggest advantages here is that we can get to these sort of populations that are more difficult to get to.
Oh, okay. And tell me about the impact of this approach, because you say you've been developing this now for what's it, a year or so, kind of now, kind of what's been the now that you've got to the point where you've kind of built these twins and you're starting, as you say, you're starting to kind of use it in your decision making. What's the impact you've seen on the business?
Yeah, so I'd say there's kind of four big areas that it's delivered a ton of value. One is speed, of course, and that's what everyone will kind of latch onto because we're just driven by speed and efficiency. But take message testing. So like like I run our insights group, so our ad testing, message testing, things we want to get in the market. Traditionally, 6 weeks, we got to get a panel. You got to
Hmm.
go test it. This is now down to minutes. And when I say
Okay.
minutes, I mean like 2 to 3 minutes. Like we could
Okay.
probably run this thing that fast with the same level of fidelity. Now the way we measure fidelity, and we compare it to what the actual human studies would say. So there we're down to a couple minutes. So that's been unbelievable, and that goes for across a lot of different studies. But message testing, just one that pops is something that we do all the time and really can do quickly.
Hmm.
Same thing with ad testing, advertising. On the fidelity side, the second would be fidelity. If you think about traditional methods, you end up with a lot of fatigue. You have to actually extrapolate out. So think about like a choice model you would
Hmm.
run. Humans can't respond to more than like five choices. So you give them five choices, and then you have to do that over and over again, and that's why people pay tens of thousands of dollars for conjoint analyses and
Hmm.
things. Here, you don't have that problem. You can show these twins as many scenarios as you want, and they will give you that choice. And so we use it a lot for understanding choice models. So for us, it's like, what are the actual drivers of pharmacy choice and understanding kind of what's more latent risk and what's actually a primary choice driver. For instance, like location and whether or not the insurance is taken is one of the number one, are one and two drivers of whether someone picks a pharmacy.
Hmm.
Then you can get to those next level of choices as well. And one example that we had in the white paper was, I think, around adherence. So understanding medication adherence.
Yeah.
We now get to what are the different parameters, and there's no fatigue, and there's no what I would say consumers sometimes are a little bit afraid to share what drives adherence. You don't have that problem here. You can ask more detailed questions and more questions that kind of get at that to understand the drivers of adherence. And one of the interesting things I think we found was a lot of it was refill anxiety. So we have new patients. They were like, how am I going to actually get this script over and over again? And it's one of these things we kind of uncovered that would have been probably a little harder to uncover if we had used just, normal patients because they may not want to admit that, oh, yeah, I'm a little bit afraid of how do I refill these prescriptions.
Hmm.
The third value, I think, is scale. So, we now don't have to run these small pilots. We can run these scenarios and tests on huge groups of people. The example there I always talk about is our Pet RX product. We were going out with, serving pets. And one of the, and one of the things that we investigated were what are the things that are going to resonate with people to say, hey, CVX can play in the space around pet medication. We learned really interesting things about how people feel about pets from the twins. One of the
Okay.
things was they don't actually they don't actually view giving the medication as an act of a chore. They view it as like an act of devotion. And there's all this messaging we had around appealing to people's love of their pet.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating came out of the twins was, yeah, that's all important. But what they really want to know is, are you connected to their veterinarian? And much like with a normal pharmacy product, will you be able to get this script to them in an efficient way without them having to do a bunch of work?
Yeah.
So it was like, hey, it wasn't enough to just be like, hey, we emotionally understand how you feel about your pet and we get that. You had to get to the point where you're like, but also we are good at this. We know how to do this, and fulfilling this script isn't that different than filling your human script. The
Right.
last one, reach. Like I mentioned, we can get to these really hard to reach populations.
Mhm.
Like so, people with like specialty conditions, like various hard to reach conditions, populations, and groups. We can now get them and twin them, and then we'll have them always on, and that helps us actually understand how do we maintain adherence and how do we make sure that people are getting the communications in those really hard to reach groups that are going to be most effective for them
Yeah.
to stay on medication. So I would say speed, fidelity, scale, reach are the four right off the bat where it's had a massive impact for us.
Awesome. I mean, one thing I wanted to ask is that when you were talking then, you had talked about like ad testing and messaging and stuff, and so are you kind of being able to only test sort of text-based stuff, or can you do multimodal sort of things? Because you show that the twins kind of like images, and that they'll be able to respond to the look and feel of something, or has the level of sophistication in terms of what kind of input can you put in to get a response?
Yeah, you can show them. We show them text, we show them videos, we can show them Figmas, so we can show them quite a bit. And we're working towards two things. We're working towards with Simile, are being able to put them in a more virtual environment, so they
Okay.
could actually experience a virtual store. And then also we're working on agent to agent. So can we actually get twins of colleagues and twins of
Hmm.
our patients and have them interact and then see how that interaction could be shaped. And I would say just broadly, it's an emerging technology. So even the four I gave you, we're learning all the time and new and
Sure.
different things, and like using it in ways that I think are more akin to like a pilot. So the four examples I gave you are really focused on like what more traditional research,
Hmm.
but we're using it more as like, okay, we're going to release this experience or we're going to do this. How are people not only going to react, but how are they going to behave? Like one of the biggest, I think, unlocks of the capability is the say do gap.
Hmm.
So, like, even in the example you're giving around different media, we can put different things in there to show them, like, hey, this is the new experience, this is the new workflow. How would you behave? Is it going to increase your adherence? Is it going to increase the rate you call us? Is it going to, what are the different actions that are going to happen from that? And that to me is where there's just a massive opportunity
Hmm.
because it's not just a research tool, like how do you feel about X, Y, and Z, which is also really powerful, but it's more around what will you actually do?
Hmm.
And that's where it's kind of becomes a crystal ball, if you will. The joke we
Nice.
have here, the oracle of Woonsocket, is I think what someone we're based out of Woonsocket, but that's kind of where I think it ends up.
Nice. So you're using AI to do this as these simulations. I mean, and I'm assuming that you're sort of like using it more broadly in the kind of the business. I mean, how are your customers or patients responding to this use? Because we see conflicting reports that people go like you mentioned it, the kind of the say do sort of gap. People go like, I'm using it every day, but I'm not really sure I trust people that kind of like use it kind of and that were responsible with my data. So it's a bit that sort of thing. So how are you seeing people respond to your customers and patients respond to the use of AI in your sort of daily operations?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think what you observe, and we've seen this with the twins, we also see this with human research, is like I think people will also always approach things a little apprehensively, but once they get value from it, they tend to lean in a lot. And you see that a lot with like even, public generative AI sources, I think. People are always a little bit skeptical, but then once they get really valuable information quickly, then they tend to adopt
Hmm.
fast. And I think for us, what the response to things like the white paper and us being super public about doing this has been positive. We've seen it in the media and elsewhere. And I think what ultimately, from a consumer's perspective, we're building better experiences. We don't have to, it's increasing our speed to market because we're able to test with these twins. We're able to understand how they're going to be affected, how they're going to behave. And then when we go live with something, we're more certain it'll work and deliver a better experience. So I think overall, I think that people have been pretty excited about the use cases here with AI, and particularly this one because it's really designed in the truest sense to make us more consumer centric. I mean,
Yeah.
I know you made that joke earlier, but we're bringing all these consumer voices into everything we do now. And, a common set of language that you hear internally here at CVS is, "Did you run that by the twins?" You
Mm.
hear it all the time, which I'm pretty proud of. But what that means is, if you want to boil that down, is what do the customers think?
Hmm.
And that's like language that's really hard to get internally at a major corporation. And now we have
Sure.
it all the time. So
Nice.
I think the level of consumer centricity here will ultimately really positively impact our consumers in a way that we're just going to build better experiences for them.
And do you think that one final kind of thing on just kind of this specifically, because you talked about being transparent about your approach, so you're and how that's kind of being responded, and you talked about this internal cultural sort of dynamic. People are going, "Have you asked the twins yet?" The That feels like almost like added layers or like added sophistication to like a governance approach, like transparency and then a cultural kind of change. It's almost like it means that because people talk about governance, right? Particularly around AI and how you can protect and manage and outcomes and outputs and things. But it feels like by being transparent about things and then almost driving this cultural change, you're almost like adding layers to that because it's not just about guardrails and policies and stuff. It's almost a bit like here's an approach and here's a cultural change. And almost, do you feel that's going to drive better governance, kind of in terms of how you manage kind of this and the impact that it has?
It's a really good question. I think it's driven demand, and it's probably put more of a onus on governance, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
is I think being so open, public about the capability, what it brings to the table, as even internally, we've done that. We've kind of really showcased it internally, all the way to the top of the company. So there's been a lot of demand to use it, and I think one of these things with one of the thing with all these capabilities, as you know from the CX world, is like this concept of democratization. Because where I think there's a potential real value add here is like, you democratize the capability and then you kind of can put all these customers in people's pocket. But man, is there a risk with that too? Because, these mirror humans. So if you know what, just like a human, you can lead the witness and you can kind of, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't pose things the right way, you can get yourself in trouble. So we've built a pretty strong governance around it, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think anyone going down this path, you better have governance structures set up. So what we've really done is we've built a validation engine. So we're constantly validating against human responses. We also have built a validation engine around drift, which is
Mm-hmm.
sort of like
Yeah.
how to compare to the population. So these twins don't drift away and end up giving kind of outlandish results or something that's a hallucination. And then I think the biggest thing that we do is we have a human at the steering wheel. So my team, really detailed and wonderful researchers, are the ones who are actually using the capability. And that human at the steering wheel is able to look and say, okay, this one we have a low confidence on this response. We should treat it as directional, or hey, something's going wrong here. We need to go look at the underlying twins. And one of the things we've challenged is basically don't look at it and just immediately say, this is wrong. It's not what I expected, because the twins could be giving you something really valuable that you
Mm-hmm.
didn't know. But go if it's something that's really challenging to what you really knew and seems very out of character, go check it and go test it and go look at it. So I think like that human at the steering wheel component has given us a lot more confidence, and especially when you're rolling something out for the first time, Adrian, as you know, when you roll out any of these capabilities, so much of it's predicated on the change management and trust of the organization. So what you can have is us go out there in these early days and say the twins said something, and then the consumer behavior when we actually launch it is completely different, because that would immediately erode trust in the capability. And even if that was something we could explain, it would be difficult to kind of get that trust back.
Mm-hmm.
So building that governance structure, the validation and the humans at the steering wheel is so essential for this being effective, that we're taking that approach, and then we're figuring out how do we give access to the broader population within CVS Health, but in a way that's controlled, that's making sure that we have the right guardrails in terms of confidence of the response. And that's a journey for us, but we're working on it.
Absolutely. I mean, so you said that was a big piece of advice is getting the governance right. I mean, what other sort of advice would you have for someone? So say that they were thinking about doing something similarly, like on CVS Health, or they sound like my company, or some of the complexities that my company has, and the groups of different customers that we serve. And that sounds like it would be really useful for us. I mean, if they wanted to say replicate your approach, what sort of advice would you give them? And where do you think this sort of approach would be applicable? Do you think? I mean, I think it's probably in a complex organization that serves a number of different kind of customer kind of groups, but you might have a different thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll start with the second question and I'll get back to the advice. But I think the applicability here is broad. I mean, it's anywhere where you want to understand how your customers are going to respond, behave, or react to a product or a service or something you're launching, a communication. So you can really build these AI twins of pretty much anyone, as long as you can get that core data that I
Mm-hmm.
talked about. So get them for an interview, get them for all those different components. So I think that's where probably more I would say more on the consumer side. We've had a lot more success there, but
Mm-hmm.
anything like a large consumer business where you're looking to test and change things, I think it has value, and it's been super valuable for us. I think one of the biggest ones for me that it's unlocked is really product and service development. So
Okay.
bringing customers way earlier in the process, because where you traditionally have this is you kind of get a little bit down the path, and then someone's like, okay, can you go run this test with consumers? But at that point, the product's already kind of been baked, and then you have things like sunk cost bias, and it's difficult to kind of backtrack. Now you can bring them way further up in the process. So anything where you're developing a product or service, I think has tremendous value. To your point on advice, I would say we already hit governance. The other thing I think is there's a change management with your own team that I think is really important. And you kind of hit on it earlier, where there's everyone kind of goes through this existential crisis with AI. And this capability in particular is really a challenge to the way traditionally things are done.
Mm-hmm.
And so you face a little bit of that apprehension from your own team. And I think one of the ways we've overcome that, though, is just showing the amount of value that an impact you can have to the organization, and how bringing this capability forward gives you just a bigger seat at the table. Because if you think about it, most most of these traditional research approaches, those four things I hit on, are really challenging: speed, fidelity, scale, and reach. And those things are difficult to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And so that honestly limits the impact that many traditional researchers can have. Now that you've solved those things, you're going to have a bigger seat at the table. Your work is going to be more impactful and more powerful. And we've seen that at CVS. And you're going to be able to serve and be more productive in a way that you weren't before. Like we can now, if you think about it, these twins are also available and they're not kind of costless to us. So in terms of, we pay for the service, but now we can use them over and over again. That's there, we can now reach groups that traditionally didn't have the budget for this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? They weren't they wanted to run a consumer study, they couldn't afford it. So I think getting into those, getting your team to buy in is really important, because again, they're the ones who are going to be at the steering wheel and driving it. And when you can get them involved, not only does it increase the impact of the organization, you also get a better product.
Yeah.
Because my team is constantly going back and working with the Simile team and working with others to make sure that this is the best capability we can have. So getting that, you can't forget that, that own employee engagement line, I guess, that we always talk about. But you have to have your own employees engaged, the CX professionals, the insights professionals, because if they're hesitant and detractors, you won't get off the ground.
No.
So I think governance and getting your team engaged are two of the biggest lessons.
Awesome. So that's about it for my big questions around kind of what your new kind of approach. I mean, unless there's anything that you've missed out that you want to highlight before I ask you some quick fire stuff.
Yeah, sure. I would just end on the twins, just be saying like this is the start. I think the line we always use internally is like we got to be where the ball goes, or that old Wayne Gretzky, and go where the puck is. Like, don't go where the puck is, go where it'll be. So I think this is just the start of this capability and where it could be, and I'm excited that we're at the frontier of it. But we're still learning and getting better at it, and I do think the implications of this simulation and using the simulation is going to be incredible. And I think you're going to see it. And I know you're a CX leader, a thought leader. I think it's going to kind of take that approach that you saw in the early 2010s with operational CX. And I think you're going to see kind of this evolve into operational simulation. And I'm really excited for that journey and seeing where this all develops. Because I think history is going to repeat itself when you saw all those, the Medallias and the Qualtrics and all those folks emerge. You're going to see something similar here with the simulation capability, in my opinion.
All right, I can imagine when I've seen all these kind of like developing capabilities with kind of people talking about it. Well, everybody's trying to own the experience orchestration kind of layer. Everybody's talking about it. But then let's say they've got somebody who's going to, let's say you're like a marketeer or something, and you're spinning up an outreach campaign, whether that's for acquisition or for loyalty or kind of whatever it might be, and you're using an agentic platform to you created a brief and then you kind of spun up some ideas and you've interrogated your audiences and all these different things, and you come up, you've drawn on your banks of almost approved kind of content and all these different sort of things, and it's going to come up with these different kind of ideas and trying to optimize it for channels and stuff. And it's somewhere along that kind of process, you can imagine that you can have the twins kind of plugged in and go like, does this make sense?
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think that that's where it's going to be. It's going to fit into so many other things that we're looking at and doing, and
Uh-huh.
like I just think it's creating this. It's amplifying the consumer. I go back to this line, but
Uh-huh.
it amplifies the consumer voice in a way I've never seen. And I mean, I've been at customer experience and insights, for over a decade, and I would say this to me is the most transformative technology I've observed.
Nice.
So, yeah.
He says, dropping the mic, moving on. So let me kind of go. Let me finish off with like some quick fire questions just to wrap things up. So first of all, best advice question. If I was to ask you to boil it all down, Sri, to like one piece of advice, we ask people to complete a sentence in order to make this easier. And the sentence is this: if you want to improve your customer experience, Sri says, do this. Complete that sentence.
Oh, as you could probably tell, I get too excited and all my answers are really long-winded. But I, but I would say the biggest thing to me is to shift your mindset, just broadly, not even with the twins. Shift your mindset from being what is the value I can extract from my customers to what is the value you can add to your customer. I think we too often as companies think about, okay, how do we change consumer behavior? How do we shift the value equation so we get more value? I think it's way simpler than that. If you add value to a consumer and you add value to someone's life, they're going to be loyal, they're going to spend more, they're going to come back more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to flip that equation. So it's really, in this order, it's basically value for the customer and then value for the business. And I think that's the biggest advice I can give someone. I would just add one more. I think, and I asked for one, but two. I think don't get single threaded through all the through one signal. I think in this day and age, and even in this conversation we've had, there's so much data and capability out in the market that just drives your knowledge of consumers. And I think it's never been like this before. And I think each of these data sources tells you something interesting, right? Like, the digital session mining, call center mining, that tells you what happened. The always on MPS is really like what is the behavior of those 200 operational variables. The surveys give you the kind of motive or what are people, why they're behaving in a certain way. You have to, and the agents, the generative agents, what will happen is what the simulation tells you. So you can stitch all this together and it creates this profile that you just never had before. So don't, for those that are in the more of the measurement side, don't get single threaded. You have to think about how you tie all these and stitch all these things together.
Perfect. Great advice. So one final thing before we wrap up. Sri, tell me a good news story. Tell me something that is the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week. And I think you're going to tell me at the time of recording, we're in the midst of the World Cup, but that's fine. So I think you're going to tell me something which might not be, well, it's time related, but it's a good thing anyway.
Yeah, well, I will say the game last night, we recorded this after the US lost to Belgium. That part was not good. That was rough for me to watch. But I think it's been cool to see just how, and we were talking about this right before we joined, but how the world has kind of come together. You got to forget. every 4 years that this happens, and in the 4 years you kind of forget how soccer and sport bring the world together. And just observing all these different countries and different US cities has been really great because it's been awesome to see all this stuff on Twitter or in on on Instagram and all this stuff where people are talking about how they're experiencing the US and how they love it and how they love the people and how the people love them. And I know you were mentioning you're from Scotland, and the Scots kind of taking over Boston and Boston embracing them. That was such a cool moment to see. And you just see that over and over again in all these different parts of the country. So it's really, been warming my heart because, there's a lot of noise and a lot of, conflict in the world. And this kind of reminds you that we're all just people. We're all just people who are trying to live our best lives, and watching everyone together do it together and kind of have this harmony has really given me hope for the world again. So it's been awesome to see, and the beautiful game really makes it a beautiful world.
Perfect. I mean, I love that. I love that idea. I love that sentiment. I love that reflection. And because it's a message of hope, right? When people left to their own devices and that are passionate about something and they get together and they can celebrate things in its the broadest kind of like sense, is that actually broadly people are all right left to their own
Yeah.
devices.
That's a great mic drop moment. People are all right. That's what I really do. I think that's what we're learning. People are really good together.
Excellent. Listen, Sri, congratulations on the work that you're doing with with Simile and the simulations. I think that's super super interesting. And like you say, I think we're only just starting down that road to see where the impact kind of goes and how it all kind of like stitches together. And so that's brilliant. So thank you for sharing your time and your insights and your expertise kind of with me today. That's been super cool.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great talking with you, and I love the podcast. So I'm honored to be on. So thank you again for the time.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.